Everyone, good morning. It's good to be back, South by Southwest. It's good to be back in Texas. I was born and raised here, and a couple of my brothers live here. And one of our traditions, when my younger brother picks me up from the airport, like a good younger brother should, he picks me up and we go straight to this taco truck, our favorite one here in Austin. And that's what we did on Saturday. We went straight there, we parked, we got out of the car, we start walking over, and there's a group of people walking towards us. And this woman starts repeating over and over again. She's saying, "It's about to get Arabian Nights up in here. It's about to get Arabian Nights up in here." And I'm looking at her and I'm looking at my brother and I'm like, what's going on? Like, I'm just here to enjoy my tacos. I want to enjoy time with my brother. And all of a sudden, in an instant, I have to make a choice. How do I want to respond in this moment? What do I want to do? And my natural impulse, I think it's natural for all of us, is anger. Right? I'm annoyed. My day could be ruined, and I want to say something mean back to her. But I know through my life of experience, it's not actually going to make me feel better. It might feel good for 5 seconds, maybe 10. But this moment has the potential to ruin my afternoon, to ruin my day, to ruin my time here at South by. I don't want that. And I also know, growing up here in Texas, you don't want to escalate situations. You don't know how people might respond. You don't know what weapons they might be carrying. And so we make a choice in this moment, my brother and I. We just let it go. And I'll tell you, that choice on Saturday when it happened, it made all the difference. And I know this is the tiniest moment. The tiniest moment, it's a tiny choice compared to all the different kinds of racism that I've faced in my life and the different challenges that I faced at home, at work, and otherwise. And even for you, the challenges that you face daily. This one's pretty tiny, right? It's not that big of a deal. But what I want to share with you is this choice made all the difference, not just for that moment, not just for the day, but for my entire week. And what I want to share with you is we all have the opportunity to make these choices constantly. We face these choices every day. And that's part of what resilience is about. It's about recognizing that life doesn't just happen to us. That when things happen at work, when it feels like things are out of control, when stuff hits the fan, and we feel powerless, it's reclaiming our agency. Being able to understand that we can navigate the adversity that comes our way. It might look different for you than it does for me. It might change from time to time and in different contexts. It might be at home, or it might be at work, or it might be at a taco truck. But each moment is an opportunity to claim our agency. That's what resilience is all about. Now, I feel a little conflicted talking about resilience because, in a way, I find it to be one of the most annoying words in the English language, right? We're talking about it constantly. Everybody is always saying how we should be resilient, how resilient we are, how amazing it is to be resilient. We have chief resilience officers. We have corporate resilience awards. We have resiliency workshops. We have resiliency workbooks. This morning, the shampoo I used said it would make my beard resilient. I don't even know what that means. And actually, that's kind of the point. The word resilient has become so ubiquitous, so overused that it's lost its meaning. We're talking about it constantly, all of us, but do we actually know what we mean when we're talking about it? And that's what I want us to explore in our time together today. What is resilience? What is this thing that we know we want, but we aren't quite sure what we mean by it? And also, how do we build it? How do we become resilient? Because the ideas enough on their own, they're not enough. The ideas, they can give us guidance, but we also need to know how we enact them. How do we create resilience? How do we become resilient? And I want to explore some of that too. And if you read the description for our session today, there's a little spoiler alert. I'm going to make the case that one driver of resilience, as I've experienced it in my life, and as I've seen emerge in the research, is compassion. I'm going to tell you why these two things are connected and how we can use compassion as a way to build resilience for us in our daily lives, in our work, and in our world. I want to start with a brief story that helped me realize some of our cultural biases about resilience, and also pushed me to start understanding what is resilience actually and what is it not. It started for me on a Friday evening. I'd had a tough week at work. I think that's fairly normal. We all have tough weeks. Raise your hand if you've had a tough day, a tough week at work. Yeah, okay, so relatable, right? This is a pretty common story. I was having a tough week at work. And I went to one of my friends, and I was explaining it to him. I was telling him what had happened, why I felt frustrated, the toll it was taking on me. And he's a good friend. And he also leads an organization. And I expected him to understand. I also expected compassion, or at least sympathy. And I was surprised when I didn't get it from him. Instead, what he said was, "You'll be fine. You've been through so much worse." And I was intrigued, right? I knew it was well-intentioned. We had a relationship of trust. I wasn't bothered by our relationship, but I was a little bothered by his comment. What did he mean? That I'd be fine? What did he mean that I'd been through worse? And so I asked him. And he said, "Well, I've seen you deal with all the hatred you get in your life. This problem that you have at work is tiny in comparison. It'll be okay. You'll survive." And I saw the truth in what he was saying, right? Part of it felt true. It was true that I would be fine. It was true that I'd survive, right? I wasn't worried that I would not survive the challenges I was facing at work. And it also felt true that I had confidence that I would be able to get through it. I knew that. And what the research tells us is that people who come from marginalized backgrounds, who face unique hardships in this country and around the world, they have deeper reservoirs of resilience. I've learned how to deal with these kinds of situations. It felt true. And at the same time, something didn't feel quite right. And it took me a few days to figure out what it was that was bothering me. And here's what I identified. Our bias around resilience are assumptions that certain people have more just because of what they look like or what their lives are like. It can lead us to overlook their struggles when they're going through them, right? In this moment, my friend didn't have a natural reaction to give me support when I was looking for it. His reaction was, "You'll be fine." I don't want to just be fine. I don't want to just be okay. I don't want to just survive. I don't want that for any of us. That is too low a bar. What do we want? We want health. We want well-being. We want happiness. That's thriving. And the difference between the two is immense. My friend was talking about survival. You'll be okay. Sure, we'll all be okay. But what if we could be great? What if we could be better? What if we could be healthy? Resilience is not about survival. It's not about gritting your teeth or biting your lip or sucking it up. It's not about being okay. It's not about enduring. It's not about suffering. Resilience is about thriving. What are the conditions that we can create so that we all have well-being? That's something that is cultural, it's social. We can create environments in our communities, in our schools, in our workplaces, where we have the opportunities to thrive. What does that look like? What are some of the core components of resilience? Trust, support networks, community, perspective, grounding. We can create for that. We can solve for that. And this is where I want to introduce the concept of compassion. Because what I found in my life is that resilience isn't just something you announce. It isn't just something that you do. It's something that requires inner transformation. Something happens inside of you. There's an alchemy. There's a shift. Something you have to grow. It's a muscle that you can build. And compassion can help us get there. Now, before I get into how we build compassion, I want to talk for a moment about what I see as an impoverished way of thinking about compassion in our society. We, in this country, are too limited in how we think about kindness and generosity. And I'll also make the case that, actually, we know better. We already know better. There's a gap between what we've experienced and how we think. And I want us to close that gap. If you ask somebody in the West today why it's important to be generous, why it's important to be kind, they'll typically give you two answers. We say, we should because it's the right thing to do. We have a moral responsibility. I think that's true. I feel that. And we'll also say we should help other people because it reduces their suffering. I think that's true too. Both are true. But there's a third element that we don't talk about that to me is actually the secret sauce of compassion. It's self-transformation. And we know this, right? Think about when you're generous, how it makes you feel. There's a reason why we say it's better to give than to receive. It changes us. It softens us. It opens us up. In a world where we don't have enough softness, in a world where we're constantly closed off to one another. Compassion does that. It sounds like a big shift. It sounds like a big idea, and I promise you it's not, right? We already know this. And in fact, my kids who are in elementary school, they can already understand this. Being kind to people helps them find happiness, and it finds us find happiness too. It's a win-win. It's not complicated, and we've already experienced this in our own ways. And if we can learn to close that gap between how we think about it and what we actually know intuitively, it can change our lives. Now, there are a lot of different frameworks. There's a lot of research around how you build compassion, how you build resilience. And I want to share a simple framework that I found to be very powerful, very simple to remember, and very transformative. And the thesis is compassion is a driver for resilience. The first element I want to share with you is curiosity. Each of these three elements start with C, because I think that's cool. So the first one is curiosity, and I want to share it with you through a recent story. Again, something that I knew already, like this is work that I've been doing for a while, but sometimes we forget, right? We're all constantly learning. And so I had this experience a few weeks back. I live in New York City now. I was going to a flight at Newark Airport in New Jersey. So if you know New York, you already know this is my mistake for trying to go to New Jersey. And it's Friday afternoon, it's rush hour, the fastest way is by train. So I get to Penn Station, and of course, the trains break down. And I get out of the station, I go up to get a car, it's surge pricing, cars are like $200. I'm annoyed, right? I had this plan and it fell apart. And I get in a taxi. And the taxi driver comes out, he's Pakistani, he speaks to me in Urdu, and he says to me, he says, "Where are you going?" And I say, "Newark Airport." And he's like, "I don't like to go to New Jersey." He says, I have to go on the highway, it's so far, but since God has willed it, I will take you. And in my head, I'm like, okay, guy, I don't need your drama. right? Like, this is your job, like, let's go. And, and maybe I should have been more sympathetic. I wasn't, right? I was annoyed and in my head. And immediately I could tell this was going to be a tough ride. He presses the button on the meter and puts in like $25 for the starting fare, which is absurd. And then he tries to go around the car in front of him, and he has plenty of space, but he's inching around as if it's close. I'm getting more annoyed. And then he stops at a yellow light when he could have easily gone. And we're getting into the tunnel, and the part that really got me was he hands me his phone, and he asked me to put the airport into his Google Maps. And I'm like, man, you have one job. Like, let's just go. Like, you should know what you're doing. And I'm getting more and more annoyed. And as I'm watching the meter go up, my blood pressure is going up. And he misses the exit to the airport, and then he misses the next exit. And I'm not somebody who gets really upset. Like, I don't really get so mad. But like, this is me at my most furious. I pull out my phone, and I put the map directions in, and I start telling him the directions in both English and in Urdu, which is pretty aggressive, right? Like, let's go. And finally, we pull up to the airport, and I'm getting my things, and I'm looking at the meter to see how much I'm going to have to pay. I want to be quick, getting late for my flight. And as I look up at the meter on the dashboard, I see his hands on the steering wheel, and they're shaking. And just immediately, without any intention, right? It's not like I did this on purpose. I just start wondering, why are his hands shaking? Maybe he wasn't being so dramatic. Maybe he knows how bad of a driver he is. Maybe he really is scared of being on the highway. Maybe he has a neurological condition. And I'll tell you, just those questions as they popped into my head, that 10 seconds, it changed my entire experience. Like, all of a sudden, I wasn't seeing this person as, someone who is messing up my day. And I'll tell you what was even more interesting to me. I didn't even need to know the answers to those questions. I didn't ask him, right? It's New York. You don't really talk to people. So I didn't ask him any of those questions. But just wondering about him, just that curiosity softened me to a degree that then all of a sudden I was walking into an airport, which is not the most peaceful experience for anyone, especially if you look like this. I walk into this airport feeling calm. 10 seconds, curiosity, those questions made all the difference. And what I want to offer you is, in a context like today's, where we are so polarized, where it's so easy to make assumptions about other people, we're constantly trying to figure out, what box do I put you in so that I can judge you? Where am I going to disagree with you so I can tell you why you're wrong? Curiosity is a way out. It's a lifesaver. It takes us away from that judgment. It gives us an opportunity to say, not what's wrong with you, but why do you think that? Why are you behaving that way? Why are your hands shaking on the steering wheel? It's all we need to open up in a context where we are all shut off from one another. So that's curiosity. That's the first one. The second C is courage. And the thing about curiosity is it means nothing if you're not able to act on it. I want to share two simple moments with you, very different kinds of moments that demonstrate to me what courage looks like in building compassion, in building resilience. The first happened on an elevator for me. It was in a condo building in New York. I walk onto the elevator, and there's a kid with his mom. He's probably about 10 years old or so. He sees me walk in, he looks at me, he looks at his mom, and he says, "Why is that man wearing that thing on his head?" And I've heard it a million times, right? I could have answered, but it's usually more interesting to see how other people answer. And so I'm waiting to hear what this woman's going to say. And she says to her son, "Well, he's standing right there. Why don't you ask him?" And I'm like, oh shit, I am standing right here. Why don't you ask me? And just think for a moment how different that is from how we behave in our culture. Can you imagine? Can you imagine asking the person sitting next to you, Why are you the way you are? We don't do that. It's scary, it's uncomfortable. But what this woman did in this moment was she leaned in. She didn't know how I was going to react. I could have been offended. It wouldn't have been unjustified. I could have been annoyed. I could have not wanted to talk to them. It happened to be that I was open to it. But let me tell you, that act of courage that this mother had in this moment, how it made me feel, like for the first time, I was probably 30, 35 when this happened, I felt seen in a way that I'd never experienced in my life. Like so many times, people had asked this question in front of me about who I am and why I look the way I do. For the first time, it felt different. That's what courage opens up. It's vulnerability. We talk about that quite a bit now, especially in corporate spaces. It doesn't always look the same. We're not always sure what to do in these moments. But by leaning in, by taking that risk, we can change relationships. We can change culture. The other example of courage that I want to share with you came through a phone call I had with a friend who's one of the brightest people I know. He's pretty young. He's rising the ranks at work. He was recently promoted to a manager, and he called me and he said, you know, people at work don't seem to like me. Like they don't like that I'm advancing so quickly. And I'm starting to hear blowback. People are spreading rumors about me. I don't really know what to do. And I said, I don't know what to do either. Like, good luck. And he said, well, has something like that happened to you before? Have people said things about you behind your back? And I said, you know, all of us. That's happened to all of us. He said, well, what do you do in that situation? And I didn't have an immediate answer, right? I didn't have something thought through, but I shared what felt true from the top of my head. And I didn't quite see how it tied into courage, but now I do. And what I shared with him, and I think what a lot of us know, is that in these moments, you have to have the courage to receive criticism, whether it's true or whether it's untrue. And part of what gives you the confidence to uphold yourself in these situations is knowing who you are and what you're about. I mean, what else is there to do in these situations? People will say things about you. They're not always true. The woman at the taco truck who was saying Arabian Nights, like, I'm not Arab. I don't even really know what she was talking about. Her perception of me was very different from how I see myself. That happens to all of us. It happens in the workplace. It's hard. And what I shared with my friend then is actually something that I'd been talking to my kids about, which is a line from Sikh philosophy. It says, Har jan Ram naam gun gave, je koi nind kare har jan ki, apna gun na gavave. The devotee, they're focused on the divine qualities. That's what they're singing. And even if someone says the nastiest thing about them, they don't lose those qualities. They still are who they are. That takes focus, right? It's so easy to get distracted. It takes clarity. Who are you and what are you about? And it takes courage to hold strong, to say, this is how I'm going to be. I'm not going to get sucked in to your negativity, right? That impulse to say, you said something about me, I'm going to say something about you. You denigrated me in front of my boss, I'm going to do something to undercut you. You're ruining my relationship with my colleagues, I'm going to ruin your relationship. It's so easy to do that, and it doesn't serve us. And the courage to recognize and the confidence to recognize who you are and how you want to be, it builds resilience. It rebuilds inner strength. It's hard. I've been there, right? I've made choices that I wish I could take back. But that is how we build inner fortitude. It's how we become stronger. The third C that I want to offer you, and the one that feels most intuitive when it comes to conversations around compassion, is connection. It feels obvious because what is compassion if we don't feel connected to the people around us? It's easy. And so instead of focusing on the idea itself, I want to offer a reframe on how we think about our relationships with other people, on what we think is the ceiling of connectivity. Because in our culture, in the modern West, I would say we have a very limited understanding of how we can approach our relationships to people. The way that we see one another today is very much informed by the European Enlightenment. As philosophers, as communities, as people are interacting with new cultures, they're trying to understand, hey, how do we deal with this diversity? Right? Does that sound similar? We're trying to figure that out in our country right now too. And so they're trying to figure this out, and they come up with a model, right? You will know names like John Locke and Voltaire, and what they'll say is, we need to figure out a way to create unity through our diversity. The founding of this country, the United States of America, the founding motto is E pluribus unum. Out of many, come one. And it belies the approach. It tells us that we come from great diversity, and our aspiration is to create unity, to become united. That's the aspiration. That's the vision. And it's a beautiful vision, right? We are the most diverse country in human history. The first to align not on the basis of shared ethnic identity, but on the basis of shared values. It's a really powerful idea, and it's really fresh. And what I will offer you is, it's not enough. It's not enough, because what we're essentially saying is, we want to become united, but that's an aspiration that we have not yet realized. We start from difference and move towards oneness, whereas many cultural and philosophical traditions will actually take the inverse approach and offer a different kind of understanding of relationship, and that is, out of one comes many. It's a subtle shift, right? We're just flipping the script here. But what we're essentially saying is, it's not an aspiration that we find unity. We start with a sense of connection. We might call it interconnectedness. My well-being is bound up with yours. By helping you, I'm not just helping you, I'm helping myself and everyone around us. You might hear this in liberation traditions where we say things like, our liberation is inextricably intertwined with one another. It's a different way of seeing who we are. It's not that you're you and I'm me and good luck to you, right? I'm going to take care of number one. It's not this individualistic approach that is so central to how we think about the world today. It's a different kind of being that says, I'm going to take care of you because I'm going to take care of myself. We're all going to take care of each other. That's transformative too. So these are the three nodes that I want to offer you of compassion: curiosity, courage, connection. And if we can build these and create transformation within ourselves to become more compassionate, we will become more resilient. We will be building trust. We will be building support networks. We will be creating perspective and grounding, the building blocks of resilience. This is what I want to offer you all today. And now I'm going to invite a name that you might know, Charles Duhigg, who has been for years known as an expert on habit formation. And what I want to talk to him about is, how do we actually go from understanding these ideas into building them? So Charles, you are welcome to join us.
Thank you so much, Simran. That was amazing. It's so touching, and thank you for sharing so much of yourself and your thoughts. Can I start by asking you the story that you told first about encountering this woman? I think that all of us in this room, we have the same aspiration, that when we encounter something that really shakes us, or someone who feels threatening, that we aspire to this kindness, to making the right choice. And yet in the moment, it can be so hard, right? It's almost like it's an ambush. You get caught off guard. Why do you think, what what is it about you and how you see the world and your experiences that made it possible for you to make that choice?
Yeah, thank you. And I see the lead-in question because it'll get into some of your expertise. Well, first, there's a reason that I shared this particular story. It's not just because it was recent, but also because it makes me look good. So and I'll say, one of my experiences of growing up in this country is that these moments happen to me fairly regularly, and I have had the opportunity, and this is one way to think about it, I've had the opportunity to practice how I want to respond. And I don't always respond in the best way, in a way that I walk away feeling like that was my best self. But knowing that that thinking of these moments not as the end-all be-all, like it's not the most important thing in the world, that these are all learning opportunities. It becomes a form of practice for me in terms of how I want to live.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you mentioned that you phrase it this way as practice, right? Because there's a bunch of other things that we refer to as practice. I have a yoga practice or a law practice or a meditation practice. These things that it seems like what we're actually trying to do is we're trying to create habits so that we don't have to, we make that decision, but making the decisions a little bit easier. And I'm wondering, one of the things that occurs to me is, so habits have this cue and the routine and a reward, and that reward is really important, and making that behavior part of something that happens automatically. How do we think about creating rewards for ourselves, or what is the reward? Because you could easily have walked away from that encounter and have made the same choice, and part of you feels like, I really wish I had told her, given her a piece of my mind, told her not to, how offensive that is. But there was some reward that you gave yourself. What is it?
Yeah, so fair warning, I'm going to turn the same question back on you because this is your specialty. But I'll say, part of the calculus here for me, it really is a split second, this moment. Like I have to decide what I'm going to say to this woman or not. And part of what goes through my mind is, what are all the different possible outcomes? How have I experienced them? And what am I looking for in this moment? And I shared with you all, like in that moment, this is literally what I thought, like I could get upset, but that's gonna mess me up for the day. And so immediately, like that went through my mind and I slid away. And it's not like I knew that is necessarily what would happen, but it's sort of the choice point. Here are the possible permutations.
One of the things I hear you saying, and tell me if you think this is right, is that, again, because you've had more experience with this, because it's something that's been a part of your life, is that you have a moment for sort of self-reflection. You have a moment to actually get a sense of agency and feel like, I get to make a choice here, I don't have to react. And that sense of agency, because you know that it feels good, it becomes a reward in and of itself. That making the right choice actually just makes you feel good because you've decided it's the right choice. Is that fair?
Right. And walking away feeling proud of how I responded, doing the best with what I could. And I think this is the challenge with some of the kinds of adversity we face daily, which is it's not always a win-win. Like sometimes it's the best of a bad situation, and you're just trying to navigate that and recognizing and being honest with yourself about, I couldn't have solved everything that happened in this. I couldn't control this woman's racist comments, but I did the best with what I was given, and that's enough of a reward.
Yeah.
No.
So I want to get into the 3 C's, but before I do, let me ask another question, which when your friend said, you'll be fine, I think all of us, I've made that mistake like 10 times today. It's definitely, and I think that it's this natural instinct, right? We want to be helpful, but we also want to say, oh, it's going to be fine, don't worry so much. What do you wish he had said to you?
So I have learned better responses by being married for 15 years and making that same mistake of, don't worry so much, you'll be fine. All I was looking for in that moment was somebody to just say, I get it.
Yeah.
I know it's hard. It's not like I was looking for answers. I didn't even know what my specific questions were. I was just sharing my frustrations with him and was hoping that he would say, I've been there, I've dealt with this. Sometimes you just want somebody to commiserate with you.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously compassion is a huge part of that, right? We want to show the compassion and feel the compassion. And I found in the research I've been doing that oftentimes we think that we're being compassionate by helping someone when actually just acknowledging what they're feeling feels like the most compassionate thing possible. Just saying, oh man, that's so hard. I'm really sorry you're dealing with that. And then not having to offer a solution, but it makes us feel seen and heard, as you point out. And I think that that's actually at the core of what compassion feels like.
Right. Yeah. Charles's new book is Super Communicators, and so this is part of what he's getting at in his book. And I'd be interested in sort of asking you, Charles, if we're thinking about concepts like resilience and compassion, things that we know we want, but we aren't exactly sure how to build habits around them. What would you say are some of the best practices or even some of the pitfalls in terms of approaching that?
So I think one of the things you mentioned, practice. Like, I think that actually we often think of things, and I'm curious if you agree or disagree with this. We often think of things like compassion and kindness in a very binary sense. Either we did it or we failed to do it. But the truth is, if you were learning to play basketball, I would never say to you, like, oh, either you're Michael Jordan or you're not. Either you're great at making like layups or it's just not going to come to you. It's the practice. It's getting incrementally better, bit by bit, that is so powerful. And I think when it comes to kindness and compassion, we beat up on ourselves when we don't meet that standard. And as a result, we're actually punishing ourselves. And our brain latches on to creating habits because we give it rewards. But now we're punishing ourselves for trying to be a little bit kind, but we weren't kind enough, or it didn't go so well. And so I think almost for seeing ourselves as scientists who are conducting experiments, and if an experiment fails, that does not mean that it's a failure. That means that you just learned something from it. I think that's at the core of how a practice becomes something that we actually do every day as opposed to feel like we should do every day.
Yeah, something's coming to mind that I haven't really articulated before, but it's something about the false expectation that comes in the cliche practice makes perfect. Right, we hear this over and over again all the time, and we expect that because we do something and we commit to doing something, if we fall or if we fail, then we're missing the bar. Right, the Jordan example is a good one. We're in Texas and near San Antonio, so I would give a Spurs reference instead. But
gotcha.
I'll take
I should have done a football reference.
Yeah, exactly. But even like the best, like Steph Curry's free throw percentage, like he doesn't make 100% of his free throws, right? Like what is this expectation around perfect, and how can that be a barrier for us sometimes to even trying? Because we say, well, I'm not going to get there.
I think if I'm the Steph Curry of kindness, that means that I'm not kind sometimes, right? Like sometimes I try it and it just doesn't work for me. I'm reminded of George Saunders, the short story writer, an interview I once heard with him when he said, I know that if after I'm kind to someone, I feel amazing. And yet I can't figure out why so many times of each day I forget that at exactly the moment that I'm supposed to be kind to someone. Mm-hmm. So let me ask you, and I think the framework helps a lot with this, at those moments, when we want to practice, when we have that choice, how do we remind ourselves? What's the practice that allows us to make this more automatic?
You know, the first thing that comes to my mind in situations like this is around not taking things so personally. And I think it's a tough thing to do because a lot of times when people are critical of us, it feels personal, right? It can have a negative impact on us personally. Like if you think about, like leave the taco truck example aside, like think about my friend who was getting negative rumors spread about him at work. And when we talked through it, we were like, actually, of course it has to do with you, but it has more to do with the other person's insecurities, right? It's their problem, and sure, it's creating problems for you, but that's almost secondary to what's out there. And so kind of stepping back and saying, whatever is upsetting this person is actually something that they need to own. It helps soften the experience a little bit for me.
I absolutely agree. And I think that ties so well into curiosity, right? There's this phrase that I was exposed to that if you feel furious, get curious, which is basically like a little mnemonic short circuit, because when you feel furious, the first thing you're thinking isn't like, I should really ask this person about why they were just so mean to me. But that the act of curiosity interrupts our own bad emotional, mental habits that might make us feel vengeance. But equally, oftentimes, much like you mentioned with the taxi driver, if we look a little bit closely, what this person has done that feels offensive to us is not actually a reflection of us. It's a reflection of something they're going through, something they're struggling with, something that might be interesting to learn about.
Yeah, and just to build on that, I think what happens so often when we get angry or upset is it's driven out of egocentrism, right? We're worrying about ourselves and how we're being victimized, and that creates a negative loop in our heads of like everything that's going wrong in our lives. And that act of curiosity, like when you're furious, be curious, that act of curiosity sort of breaks down that the whole world is about you, and all of a sudden you are able to get a little bit more perspective about things that are happening outside of you. Like just that taxi driver example, like maybe he had a neurological, like that question to me, like it made me step back all the way as soon as I thought it. I was like, This is so messed up that I'm late for a flight, but you know, what could he be going through that's so much more important than what I'm worried about?
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think one of the tough things about curiosity, there's been a bunch of studies done trying to figure out what makes people really anxious, and usually the number one answer is being forced to have a conversation with a stranger, right? When you're on that bus or you're in that taxi and like the driver just won't stop talking to you and you're like, God. In those situations, how do we cultivate a reward? Because we should be curious, right? How do we cultivate that reward so that it feels like a positive to have that conversation? And I think this gets a little bit into the courage thing, right? Because we have to be courageous to jump into that conversation.
We do, and I think, you know, part of what feels like a reward to me in this moment is I think something all of us are feeling right now is we say we're the most connected society in human history, like with technology and globalization and so on. We feel proximate to one another, but we don't feel close to anyone. Like the feeling of connection, I mean, with ourselves, but also with one another, it's not there. And that's leaving a big gap in what we want. And so I try and remember this in these moments where I say, you know, I'm introverted. I also don't want to have a conversation with my cabbie or my bus driver. Like, leave me alone, right? Like, let's do our thing. But what I recognize in these moments is that these are medicine for me. Like, this is what I need in order to feel connected to the people around me. And they're micro moments. They're small things, but they can make a difference in terms of how I'm experiencing the world.
I think it's a really interesting thing. Just out of curiosity and just show of hands, how many people, if you were alive in the 1950s or the 1980s as opposed to right now, pre-internet, pre-digital, how many of you think that you would have more connections, that you would feel closer to your neighbors or the people around you? It's a good number of hands, right? And yet, we live at a time when we can connect with anyone, theoretically. It's 2 clicks to find someone's email address and write to them. But you're right. It feels like sometimes the easier it gets, the harder it is to actually form that connection. And I want to ask one more question, and then we'll move to the audience's questions, and feel free to continue sending them in. When it comes to this connection part, one of the things I really liked is that you mentioned, you know, sort of out of one, many. And oftentimes when we meet someone new, the way that we try and find that connection is we talk about commonalities, right? Oh, you have kids, I have kids. Oh, you live in New York, I live in New York. And yet, the most important part of the relationship, or the most interesting, or the thing that might allow us to bond most, is to also talk about our differences. I'm wondering, you know, as a Sikh, like, how do you see the world differently from how I see it? It's interesting, and I want to tell you how I see the world, and that's how we get to know each other. How do we balance between that? When you're seeking to connect, how do we balance between what we have in common and where our differences are, particularly when those differences are things like politics or gender, politics or social identity issues. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question because in some ways, this is the binary that we create for ourselves, right? Are we different or are we similar? And the reality is both, right? We have a shared humanity and shared experiences, and you mentioned live in New York, have kids, we're writers, like there's stuff we can talk about.
Yeah.
Then we have all kinds of differences too. And I think my experience, sometimes when we get caught in these binaries that we create for ourselves, the best way out is to think about our most local relationships. What are your conversations like with the people you're closest to, your family members, your best friends? You talk about what you share and you talk about what's different. And both are equally important, at least in my view. Right? And that's part of what makes the richness of our connections with one another, that we are different and those differences matter, but also there's a lot that we experience that's the same. And one of the hardest things I think, and something that I even think about as I come on the stage is, as I walk up here, I'm like, are people going to be closed off to me because of how I look? Are they going to see me and be like, I have nothing in common with this guy? And part of what I've realized over and over again from childhood is, as soon as I open my mouth and tell you about who I am, you're like, I know you. I have a similar experience. I know what that's about. And I think that to me is what constantly reminds me that it's about both.
Yeah.
What we share and what we don't share.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Let's move to some of the questions from the audience. So Jennifer Lee sent one in. That's a great question. How can organizations and leaders foster environments that encourage the development of resilience and empathy among their teams? This is a fantastic question because I think about this all the time, right? We spend most of our time at work, but oftentimes work feels like the least hospitable place for compassion and courage and curiosity and resilience. What could business leaders do or organization leaders do to change that?
Yeah, the place where I would begin, and I know you do some of this work as well, and I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. The place where I would really begin, and where I think is the foundation, the bedrock of all of this, is around empathy. We put so much effort into creating cultures where people feel like they belong, right? We have efforts around diversity and inclusion and ERGs and so on. And the challenge is so often these feel like very siloed communities where there's not actually much humanity. And so part of what I would say is make compassion and empathy a core value of the organization and something that you're infusing into everything. Not just your DEI strategy or your ERGs, but also in terms of how you're making business decisions, right? Who you're working with, who your clients are, and prioritizing that so that it becomes seen as something that is a part of everything that the organization is about. And so when people who are part of your team and your community are making their own decisions, they're saying, well, how does compassion, how does empathy fit into my strategy? How does it fit into how I'm showing up at work? And that itself can start creating the culture if you can do that from the top.
I think that's a great point. And I think that oftentimes what I hear within companies when someone raises something like that is they say, look, the truth is there's a lot of times we can't be compassionate, right? We got to make business decisions. If there's layoffs that have to happen, there's layoffs that have to happen. And I don't want my employees to be hobbled by the empathy that they feel for other folks. And this actually links to the next question that I wanted to ask you from Pranika Uday Borkar. I apologize if I mispronounce your name, which is, how do you deal with needing to be unkind or harsh as a form of self-preservation? When you're picking kindness and compassion for yourself over others, which I think is a lot of what these business leaders say. They say, look, I have to make these really hard decisions, and sometimes I have to do it absent empathy. And as a result, like, it feels like you're burdening me by telling me to be more empathetic. What would you say?
Yeah, it's a real question. It's one that a lot of us face. And the question often, again, relies on a false binary, I think, which is, do I need to be unkind to somebody else to be kind to myself? And I would actually just offer a reframe, which is, how do I ensure that I am being self-compassionate? How am I making sure that I'm making decisions that are compassionate? Sometimes you can't help everyone in the world, right? I can't help everyone in the world. You can't help. We can help who we can. We can be compassionate. But it doesn't mean that to the people that we are not serving, that we are being unkind to them or closing ourselves off to them. It's just not what we are mandated to do, right? It might not be in our mission. It might not be in our capacity. We might not have the resources to do it. But it doesn't mean that we are being unkind to people. And I think what my experience is that sometimes making the effort to look within and saying, what do we need? That can be personal. What do I need? Or it can be organizational, right? What does our team need? What can we handle? And what is the boundary, right? What is the boundary that if we cross it, we're actually going to hurt ourselves? And placing a line in the sand there, saying we're not going to cross that because that's the compassionate thing to do.
I totally agree. And what I hear you saying, and tell me if you think I'm getting this wrong, is part of it is just having the conversation. That we avoid the conversation right now because we do sit as a binary. You should either be empathetic or we live in a dog-eat-man world and empathy is going to just hobble you. But the truth is that when we have the conversation, people tend to get very nuanced very quickly. We're comfortable with nuance. And as a result, when we avoid those conversations, we're robbing ourselves of an opportunity to see to see something that we can do differently and better. Okay, so I want to get practical on this. We've got about 8 minutes left, and a number of the questions are asking, how do we actually do this? So Taruj Khan asked, how can daily practices and habits help individuals strengthen their capacity for empathy, and what are some specific exercises or techniques that you recommend?
Yeah, Charles and I had a great conversation prior to this session, and one of the things we were commenting on, his first book, which was on the bestseller list for 2+ years,
yeah.
3+ years,
yeah,
long time, was on the power of habit. And one of the things we were talking about with regard to this conversation is that we're talking about inner transformation, compassion, and it's not just about what you do with your hands every day through a disciplinary practice to make a habit, right? Like brushing your teeth is a habit. And part of what we're exploring here is how does that inner transformation occur? And it requires not just what you do, but also the intention behind it, right? So for example, at the taco truck, I happened to ignore that woman. If I ignored everyone who said something messed up, like it doesn't necessarily mean that I am being compassionate in each of those situations. What goes through my head in these moments, as I shared, is what are the possible outcomes? And also, what is the best way to show up? Like, who do I want to be in this moment? How can I be compassionate? In that moment, let it go. In other moments, I say stuff. In some moments in my life, as a kid especially, I fought back. And those felt like the compassionate responses. Sometimes they did, sometimes it depends on the situation. And so what I'm trying to say here is it's not just what you do, right? There's not a specific formula for doing this. I mean, you have a framework, which I think is really powerful, but it's not just what you do, it's also what's in your heart when you're doing it. And that is a really important part of building empathy and compassion.
So if we went out into the world after this panel and we had one mandate to try and increase these 3 C's in our life, would it be I should have a conversation with my taxi driver and ask him questions? Would it be that I should, when I see someone who's making me crazy and they're frustrating me and they can't drive their car, imagine, oh, it's actually because, they just got out of surgery and it's really like, what daily practice do you think helps us achieve that change in our heart?
Yeah, if it's one to start with, I would say it's the beginning point I find is wonder, curiosity. So as you meet people, especially the ones who are most annoying to you, right? It might be someone in your family or someone at work, but just taking a moment and wondering about their lives and so starting to see the humanity in them. I think that's such a powerful starting place.
Yeah.
I think the other thing I would say is, so often, and I've read this in your work on habit, like we want to go from 0 to 100 overnight. And so it gets back to your question about like, what is the reward and how do we incentivize it so that we feel like we're actually achieving the goal we're wanting to have. And so being compassionate to yourself in those moments where you're not able to see someone for who they are and all their humanity, right? And still getting angry and frustrated and saying, that's okay. Like, I'm building towards here. Like, I think that's a really important part of the practice.
I totally agree. There's a researcher named Nick Epley at the University of Chicago who's done a lot of research on having conversations with strangers on buses or in trains. And he basically says, every time you do it, it turns out so much better than you think it's going to be, right? You actually end up enjoying it more. It's less awkward than you think it's going to be. And so I talked to him and I read his research and I was like, okay, from now on, every train I'm on, every taxi I step into, I guess I got to start asking questions. And it was awful. I was exhausted. It was just too much. I think because I wanted to go from 0 to 100 because I had this idea that perfection, that practice makes perfect, and therefore anything that's less than perfect doesn't meet the goal. And yet, and all of you know this, if I talk to one taxi driver a week and then 2 a week, it's going to get easier and it's going to get easier and it's going to be more satisfying and rewarding for me. It's okay. Let me go to Donna Snyder had a great question, which is, how do you distinguish compassionately moving on from withdrawing from difficult conversations? Which is a tough one, right? Because the compassion from one of my coworkers who's not doing a great job might be to say, look, they have problems at home, I understand. But it might also be just that I don't want to confront them and say, like, you're not doing a great job. How do we tell that difference? Where does that difference lie? What is our moral responsibility?
Yeah, and just to add to the complexity of that question, what are you personally willing and able to hold, right? And so for example, think about this elevator moment that I had with this kid where the mom turned to me and said, why don't you answer his question? A lot of people wouldn't want that. It happened to be that I loved receiving the question, but it's not everyone's responsibility to explain who they are, or why they look the way they do, or where they come from, right? That can be offensive to a lot of people. And so recognizing, both for yourself and for other people, that we all have our own dispositions, what we're willing to do, what we're up for, what we're comfortable with. I think that's an important element here. But the question is a great one also, because so often we tell ourselves it's all or nothing, right? I'm going to take on the responsibility of doing this task, of having this conversation. And when things start to get rough and move beyond where we're ready to be, we force ourselves to do it anyway. And then we end up in a bad spot, right? And so this question of self-compassion comes back up in this moment, and to say, well, what can you manage? Where can you go? And recognizing that that line is not the same for everybody. I think that's really important, and especially in a workplace setting where often we are committed to metrics and statistics and saying, here are the benchmarks we all need to meet. And to say, well, actually, we need to be a little bit more tailor-made. Like, we need to customize this for different people based on where they're coming from. And I think that opens up a different kind of care for one another.
So I think we have time for just 2 quick questions. One of them is from someone who's anonymous. I actually love this question. How do you mitigate a culture of performative empathy in the workplace? Which I think all of us have seen, right? They feel so bad about everything that's happening. And what do we do to make it non-performative and make it real?
Yeah, okay, so I'm going to ask you this question too, because there's a difference between habit formation, and which requires a certain sense of performance, right? You need to do something.
Absolutely.
But then there's also like the superficial pretend, like, let's do it. So my quick answer to this, so I can give you an opportunity to respond, is modeling. Like, the best I've seen is showing up and demonstrating for people what real, actual care looks like. And you know, it in part has to do with my own annoyance around performativity, right? People pretending like they care, but they really don't. But I think one of the answers for them is to really show them, here's what it looks like to care in this moment.
I totally agree. And I think that sometimes we see what looks like performative. Sometimes empathy is performative. But sometimes it's actually someone who's just very unpracticed. And so as a result, they kind of seem like they're acting because they're following these scripts that they've been exposed to because they don't know the scripts intuitively. And I've found that when I talk to them, not just empathy, but at any kind of venue, that oftentimes I find that it's much more genuine than I thought it was, and they're more vulnerable. than I assumed that they were. Okay, we have time for literally just one question. It's very fast. Who has the best tacos as a Texan, San Antonio or Austin?
Great question. San Antonio. San Antonio tacos. All right, thank you, Charles. Thank you all for being here.
That was
really
wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Charles.